Okay, welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today to our Authors at Google series. Welcome to everyone here in person and everyone on webcast as well. I'm Bradley Horowitz, Head of Product for Google+, and it's my pleasure to introduce David Weinberger. Now, David has one of those resumes and CVs that just goes on and on, so I'm going to pluck out a few highlights so you know, to remind you why you're here. He's the co-author of the bestseller, The Clue Train Manifesto, which Information Week called the most important business book since Tom Peters' In Search of Excellence. He's also the author of Small Pieces Loosely Joined, A Unified Theory of the Web, and the author of Everything is Miscellaneous, The Power of the New Digital Disorder. You have a knack, sir, for titling your books. I think these are wonderful and intriguing. He's also a senior researcher at Harvard's Berkman Center for Law. He's the co-director of the Harvard Library Innovation Lab at Harvard Law School and is a Franklin Fellow at the United States State Department. He's a frequent advisor, commentator on NPR and to other news organizations. He wrote gags for Woody Allen's comic strip for 7 years. He notes that this raises expectations he will not meet in the talk you're about to hear. He has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Toronto and taught philosophy for 6 years, and on and on. The way that I think about David's work is to sort of think about the parallel to athletics. There are some people who are just blessed. They're born 6'1" and can throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. When you pair these people with someone who's an expert in biomechanics and can actually teach them about fast twitch muscle fibers and air resistance and things like that, it will take the already good and make them great. All of us here at Google, you're exceptional. You're here because you're the best at what you do, and then we train each other and become sort of steeped in our googly principles, and then great things happen. The way I think of David's work, he's part sociologist, part anthropologist, part social psychologist, economics, what else? Journalist. All of this is sort of mixed in. And what he does is he holds up a mirror to the work that we're doing. He helps us better understand ourselves. He frames it in ways that are valuable in understanding our own work. And that's my experience always when I read his books. I end up with a better appreciation for my own work. Things that I did and took for granted are now reframed in ways that I can better understand myself. And so I really encourage you all to read his works, to pay attention today. And without further ado, I want to welcome to the stage David Weinberger.
What a great introduction, which I can't live up to. So thank you very much. And it's especially delightful to me to have this coming from you, Bradley, where we haven't seen each other in a few years. In the 5 minutes we had coming up here, we already had a conversation that changed my mind about a couple of things. So sort of typical of Google and of Bradley. So I do want to talk about basically the topics in this book, and in particular, a question that I think has become pretty pressing, which is this bizarre phenomenon, unexpected phenomenon, that the most important pillars of our culture, especially when it comes to knowledge, have started to just fall apart, whether it's encyclopedias. And encyclopedias, besides being an actual collection of knowledge, were for many years the sign of your home's commitment to knowledge if you had the encyclopedia in your house, and suddenly just gone. They're not gone, but you know what I mean, as a cultural reference. Newspapers, obviously also getting aggregated and getting re-aggregated. Libraries, which are very much, every librarian is wondering what's going to happen to libraries, and nobody knows. We just don't know. This core institution in our culture of knowledge, we don't know what's going to happen. It's pretty amazing to be living in these times. And these changes have occurred because of what, in some sense, is a really small technology, because of hyperlinks. A little hyperlink, this little bit of code, granted embedded in a much bigger system. Nevertheless, this little bit of technology just sort of pings against these mighty institutions of knowledge, and the institutions fall over. This is unexpected, and it's certainly worth asking why. And I am not going to be able to answer that question, but I want to talk about it in terms of, in particular, knowledge as an institution, which is a peculiarly important, it is a key institution, knowledge is, in our culture. I'm only talking about the West and Western knowledge, by the way, in large part because if you look at this quote from Senator Daniel Moynihan, it's a quote that's coming up more and more these days. It makes a certain promise, and this is the promise of knowledge in the West for the past 2,500 years. Everyone is entitled to his own opinion, not his own facts. That's a very cool expression, really nicely put, and I think we respond to it these days because it offers some comfort, and some very traditional comfort, that yes, we all disagree, there are fights all over the place, but if we could just sit down and focus on the facts, then we can come to agreement. We can live together in agreement. And that has been the promise of knowledge from the beginning, from the Greek beginnings 2,500 years ago, that we will be able, that knowledge will enable us to live together across our differences. So, a really quick trip through what knowledge was. You know all of this, and we've thought about knowledge as a picture of the world that we build up sort of point by point, brick by brick. We do this across generations. If you work hard, you might be able to contribute a brick or two to this picture of the world that we've been creating. That this is a picture in which each piece is nailed down. We're nailing down stuff. I know I'm mixing metaphors like crazy, but and finally we're able to do this because in the great rush of sensation or the great mix of mere opinion, which is where the concept of knowledge originally began with the Greeks, so many opinions, you have to figure out which ones are worth holding on to, which ones are true and worthy of belief. We're able to do this because we go through these streams and we pan for gold. Yes, 4 metaphors in under a minute. That knowledge is relatively scarce, that most of what we see is not knowledge, it's wrong, it's illusion, it's opinion, it's mere sensation. Knowledge is the real stuff that we are able to filter out. So that's been the project of knowledge in our culture. And from the beginning, it has recognized and tried to deal with the fact that the world is obviously way, 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 way bigger than what can fit into anybody's skulls. And the Greeks knew this. We know this all the way through our history. The world is much bigger. Our knowledge gets much bigger. Our skulls don't get much bigger. And so that's a real problem. How do we, small creatures, know the world? And we adopted in the West a particular strategy, which is, to put this crudely, to reduce what there is to know so that our brains can manage it. Our brains collectively can manage it. And so one of the more prominent techniques has been to break off brain-sized chunks of the world and to allow somebody to master that chunk, to dominate that chunk and become an expert. And then we can go to the expert when we have a question or go to the expert's book and we can ask the expert a question and we can get an answer and we can move on because it's been answered. So this is a hugely, and if we're not sure if we trust the expert, then we can look up her or his credentials and move on. Oh, I didn't know you have a degree from wherever. This works. This system absolutely works. It's made us the dominant species on the planet. It's incredibly efficient, but it is primarily constructed as a system of stopping points. So you ask the expert, and the efficiency of the system is, assuming the credential is acceptable, you don't have to ask anymore. You got your answer. You can move on. You don't have to repeat the experiment. You don't have to go look at the primary research. The expert told you, and you are right, generally, of course, to rely upon genuine experts. But this is a system about creating a set of stopping points so that we can manage in a world that is just way, way too big otherwise. So it works. It's a fantastic system. It's an amazing system. But it's not what knowledge is. It's what knowledge is when its medium is paper. Paper is itself a stopping point. It's just the way that it is. You can't click on the page and get to the next source. It has footnotes. You're in a book and you're reading and there's a footnote. And so there are obviously connections out to the world, and we know books are written by people who are deeply involved in social networks. All that's true. But the book itself, as the medium of knowledge, is a hugely disconnected and disconnective medium. And so there's the footnote. You don't pursue footnotes. It's very rare that anybody actually uses the footnote as a link, because it means getting on a bus and going to the local library and hoping that they'll have the work, and they probably won't. And if they do, it's probably out. And meanwhile, it's very expensive to get past the disconnected nature of books. And so our idea of knowledge is actually, unsurprisingly, and it's completely a McLuhan thing, is unsurprisingly a reflection of the nature of its medium, disconnected medium. So you have a book, you're an author, you've got to try to put everything into the book that the reader needs, because you know the reader's not easily going to be able to hop out of the book and continue. So we have a sense of knowledge that comes directly from books, but is not knowledge in itself. It's not knowledge's own nature. It's what knowledge looks like in books. But now, of course, we have this different medium. It's usually hugely connected. You can think about links as being a new type of punctuation. The old type tells you where to stop. Links tell you how to continue and provide you the means, the smallest possible flick of the human finger, and you've now done the thing that otherwise requires books and old card catalogs in the old days and crawling through shelves. So we have a hugely connected medium, which is fantastic, obviously, but there are also issues. And so my hypothesis is that knowledge is taking, just as it took on the properties of its old medium, it's now taking on properties of the new medium. So I want to look at 4 of those properties. And the first is obviously this is too much. The old paper-based medium, very restricted in how much could be output or stored. Now, no, it's way too much stuff. So Clay Shirky said recently, and put it brilliantly, as he tends to do, oh, Clay, that there's no such thing as information overload. There's only filter failure. Brilliant way of putting it. And he's trying to provide us with some historical comfort, some historical continuity. I think he's basically saying, don't freak out. We've always in our history have at times felt overloaded by information, and we know what to do about it. We fix our filters. So just, and I think he's absolutely right to give us a sense of continuity, but I want to point to 2 discontinuities, which I think Clay would probably be okay with, but I'll let him speak for himself. I also want to just a sort of shout out to Ann Blair, who makes the same point in a book that came out 6 months before my book, which is Too Big to Know, and hers is called Too Much to Know. Just one of those things. Hers is a very scholarly and interesting look at what happened to information in the age of Gutenberg. It's actually a little broader than that, but it is looking very carefully at what information overload actually was and what the filters were. So the term information overload itself came to prominence through Alvin Toffler's book, Future Shock, 1970, very good book, in which he models the term on the prior term, which was sensory overload. Now, he did not come up with the term, right? The sensory overload was in the 1950s, the idea, which was that, well, your senses get overwhelmed at a Grateful Dead concert. There's too many lights and sounds and music and people pushing in on you, and that can cause your sensory circuits to blow, and you will fall down as a quivering mass with your eyes rolled back in your head. And it was an individual psychological syndrome. Same thing, once we decided for whatever reason, which I don't understand, but actually I'm quite interested in, that brains are information processors, which let's not get started on. But once we decided that, then of course there has to be the equivalent thing, which is information overload, with the same sort of effect. Too much information and you will fall down and be a quivering mass, irrational mass. In fact, Toffler says that sanity itself hangs upon avoiding information overload. It's very much an individual symptom. A problem that happens that strikes you as an individual. So what did information overload look like in 1974? Well, some marketers did some research investigating this, in which they gave 192 housewives 16 brands, each of which had 16 different categories of information. And they discovered, these marketing researchers, that with that much information, the quality of the housewives' decisions went down. This was information overload. 16 brands, 16 categories, and the poor housewives had to be protected from this much information, which was the conclusion. Therefore, we're doing the housewives a favor by not taxing them with that much information. But we look at this now, and this is like a joke. I mean, this is laughable. That's what information overload is? 16 brands, 16 categories? I mean, yes, that is what information overload looked like. So it has gone in the past, since 1970, when the term came into prominence, from an individual, a problem for an individual, that you will fall down quivering, to simply being not only scaled up, but just a feature of the environment. It's not a complaint about an individual, it's about our culture. There's information overload. And when people complain about information overload, they don't say, oh, I feel a seizure coming on, somebody put a piece of wood between my teeth so I don't swallow it. They are instead really saying, I want more information, I want the right information, get me more information, hurry, stat, more information. Our idea of information overload has shifted very much. It is a different concept than we have had in the past. Second discontinuity in information overload is that the nature of filters themselves have changed. Yeah, sure, so filter failure, but filters have changed. So in the physical world that we all are very familiar with, when you filter something, you filter the other stuff out. All right, so if you are on the acquisitions committee of your local library, you choose the new books, they get put up on the nice shelf in the library, new books, and everybody's very happy when they go in and they see that. And what people don't see is 1 million books are published every year. They don't see the 1 million minus 1,000, whatever it is, stacked in the sad and lonely trucks that are backing away with their hearts broken from the library loading bin. You do not see that. You only see what has been brought forward because that's how physical filters work. You get rid of, you hide, you dispose of, or never make available the stuff that doesn't make it through the filter. The articles that get sent into the manuscripts that get sent to book publishers that get rejected, you never see those. They're filtered out. On the web, obviously, we filter differently. When I make my list of top 10 science articles of the week or whatever on my blog, all that I'm doing is choosing 10 and reducing the number of clicks that it takes to get to them. I'm not throwing anything out. I'm not making anything invisible or hiding anything or rejecting anything. I'm just simply shortening the number of clicks. And all that material that didn't make my top 10 list is still there and will show up in the next search that somebody does on some search engine, for example, or will be passed around in email, or will be in somebody's social network or software, or whatever. All that stuff is still there, it's still available, may show up. So on the net, we don't filter out, we only filter forward, and furthermore, the search engines are very, very eager to show us exactly how much is there that they aren't showing us on the first page. And so we're now constantly aware of just how much there is, something that was hidden from us before. We filter forward, but we're now much more aware of the overload. And we seem absolutely fine with it, in part because we don't have to reduce the world by filtering out. We can enhance it by filtering forward. So this leads to a new strategy that one sees adopted all over the place, which is, in general, include everything. If you're going to try to, rather than trying to curate a collection, and there's tremendous value there too, of course, but rather than seeing this as the first alternative, instead include everything. The economics of deletion obviously have shifted so that it's often it's cheaper to include than to exclude. The problem with building curated collections, and as I work in a library, I do appreciate the value of them, but the problem with deciding what's going to be in, what's going to be out, is that you can never do that adequately. You cannot anticipate what people are going to be interested in because we're a crazy, squirrely species, and there's no telling what we're going to be interested in. So if you were curating a news collection and you decided to keep out of it all the gossipy, trashy stuff about celebrities, Lindsay Lohan, all the rest of it, probably a good decision in one sense, a reasonable decision in any case, but you will have just deprived a set of scholars of the primary materials, the source materials they need in order to investigate their topic, which, for example, is the effect of media on women celebrities. You will have completely killed this academic conference about the same topic. So you don't know what's going to be interesting or important to people. And furthermore, you can't predict history. So nobody could have predicted that the 1996 records of the library committee in Wasilla was actually worth including in some curated collection, because you could not predict what was going to happen in 2008. I mean, nobody did. So there are good reasons to try to include everything. But if you do that, where everything is an overstatement, but you know what I mean. If you do that, you have to give users ways of filtering on the way out, according to what they're interested in and how they think about how the world is organized. There's so much activity over the past 15 years. You can track the history of the web by watching the history of how we are learning to filter large collections for ourselves and for one another. I'm at Google. I'm not going to, you know that. So, okay, so the next characteristic of the net that I think knowledge is picking up is messiness. So we're really good at organizing things. We've gotten incredibly good at doing it. And not simply because we want to be able to find things, although that would be enough. But for most of our history in the past 2,500 years, we've believed that we are organizing things not simply for finding, but in order to discover what they are. To know what something was in the West has been to know where it fits in the order of the universe. So if you're Aristotle, you're arranging things by, and in the West, we're basically all Aristotle, that you're trying to figure out how this is different than the other objects in its class and how it's the same as, and you do this nested hierarchy. To know what something is to discover its position in its hierarchy, the order that God established, and that is our spiritual mission as well, at least post-Greek. Or it's to see the one logical order which is also beautiful, by the way. The order, truth and beauty, same thing. The order is a thing of magnificent beauty, and it was our task to discover it. So it wasn't simply a matter of finding. Well, there's a reason why we thought this way, and I believe it has a lot to do with the fact that the physical world does work in that way. That is, when you and your spouse are trying to figure out how to organize the CDs in your collection, and you want to do it alphabetically, and your spouse wants to do it by genre or whatever, only one of you can win. Because in the physical world, everything does have to be in one and only one spot, and you can't have two things in the same spot. Atoms, and we've dealt with it. We've taken that limitation, and we've imported it into the world of ideas, so that we had the idea that the order of the universe, also everything has a single spot, and there's only one right order. So in arranging our physical stuff, somebody had to decide whether Philly Wacko here who's playing cracked avant folk while ranting against the, can't read it, the broads who wronged him, whether that's actually under British psych or whether that should be under acid visionaries and weirdos. I'm sure there was a very intense argument about this, but somebody had to win. Whereas obviously digitally, if it's a digital collection, we'll all just make playlists, and we'll have as many as we want, overlaying them. We don't have to argue about it anymore, and each of these actually exposes some meaning. And so now to think that there is a single order that says what a bird really is and that it's worth our time to argue over that, to do that in a hyperlinked world, a tagged world, all the multi-classification and playlisted world, it now seems ridiculous. It's not an argument we're interested in having anymore. It just seems pointless to think there's got to be one order of the universe. We have this idea that dominated our culture for millennia has dropped away. So if I say to you, and there is a single order of the universe, of course, this thing that was not only taken for granted, but was taken as human destiny to parse, to figure out, now it seems to you like I'm a crazy guy. Yeah, there is a very large change. And it actually, I think, overall is a wonderful change, because it turns out that messiness is how you scale meaning. Multiple playlists, multiple tags, all piled up on top of one another. Each one of them has some meaning. It has some information to contribute. This is how you scale meaning, and that's what we're doing now. Okay, unsettled. Back to Moynihan. Remember this idea that we all just focus on the facts and agree and sit down, preferably over coffee, the coffee house ideal from the Enlightenment, very powerful sort of image. We sit down, we have a rational conversation, and we can figure this out, and we can agree, because there are facts. And of course there are facts. But then you go out on the web, and every link expresses some difference between the page that you're on and the one that you're being sent to. Here's a page that expands on what I said, or disagrees, or is funny, or you say why you're sending somebody to that place. And so and that's where the value of the web is. I mean, take absurd cases. If every page was exactly the same, the web would have negative value. It's only because it's this web of difference that the web has value. And it's not just difference, it's linked difference, which is an amazing development. that we not only have a moment in our history where we're able to see all the ways we disagree and enhance one another, the ways that our points of view are different, those points of view are now linked. And those of you who are fans of Hegel, this is a wonderful Hegelian moment where it's, yeah. So here we have this differences that are in conversation, and sometimes quite literally in conversation. This is very different than the picture of the world that Moynihan paints for us and that we've had as part of our Enlightenment ideal, and it really bothers us. And I think there's truth in each of these worries, each of these fears. I mean, we should be taking them really seriously, and there is truth in them. But you go out on the web, and what you see is all this disagreement. Well, I think what's actually happening is that the net is exposing a truth that we've always known in our hearts, but we couldn't quite acknowledge. We didn't have the environment which made it possible to acknowledge it, which is, you know what, we actually don't agree about anything. We don't agree about anything. There's nothing on the web there's no fact uncontested on the web. There are facts. I like science, I like facts. So I want to be really clear. There are facts, some statements are false, and there are people who lie. I totally believe that. My point is, we're not going to agree about who those people are. We're just not. It doesn't matter how many facts you bring to bear. Nope. There's going to be continuous disagreement. And there always will be. And my evidence for saying that is all of human history. We've never agreed about anything. Now we can see that we don't. It is evident before our faces. So one of the more, this is a problem. One of the more hopeful things, though, is that we have also been evolving rapidly ways of dealing with difference and disagreement that enable us to move forward even, and in fact, benefit from that disagreement. And this is actually a terrible example, but it's a real example from a couple of days ago. So there's this YouTube site that famously has long conversations, and they're not particularly well-threaded conversations. That doesn't seem to be what oh, I see, sir, you seem to have a YouTube sweatshirt on. You must have been to their offices at some time. So those conversational threads at YouTube serve a different purpose, and not for long threaded conversations. So here's the new Batman trailer, 4.5 million views. And this, from about 3 days ago, there's a thread of about 30 back and forths about circumcision. It's pretty learned. It gets a little nasty, but it's pretty learned. I mean, they're flinging facts back and forth and so on. It's a little hard to understand exactly how this got started, and it doesn't matter. The point is that in a different conversational medium, at YouTube it doesn't matter much because it'll just be pushed down. There's such volume. But in a different conversational medium, there would be a way of forking conversations. And forking is a really powerful tool that's hard to do in the real world. It's sort of rude and disruptive to do in the real world, but is hugely helpful in the online world for where people are going down in very heated fashion, down some thread that has nothing to do with the original thread. And so you fork it, take it somewhere, continue it. Anybody else who would like to continue arguing about circumcision, please feel free to do so. We're not ending the conversation by any means. Just maybe not on the Batman site, because we want to talk about something else. Forking is a really powerful tool for enabling difference to continue without telling people to shut up, which is what we would do in the real world if that conversation broke out. The second technique that I think is amazingly powerful for not only dealing with difference but benefiting it from it is namespaces. So in the 19th century, we spent an awful lot of time trying to figure out whether that thing is, first of all, is it really a mammal or what is it? And second of all, could it possibly even exist because it violated the classification schemes that we had? Didn't fit into our taxonomy. There was very real thought that it must be a hoax. Even when one was delivered with eggs in it, it was assumed it must be a hoax because such a thing could not exist. So we spent a lot of time arguing about how to classify this, and now we don't so much because, and other species and genes as well, because, for example, because we can just set up a namespace. And we can say, well, okay, I call it a platypus and I think about it this way, you call it a water mole, that's fine, so long as I know that what I call platypus, you call a water mole, and you call this thing. Namespaces are a wonderful way of dealing with differences. At Encyclopedia of Life, they in fact have two servers. One, so if you're a scientist who wants some information, you can use whatever nomenclature you want, because they track them all that they can find. So it doesn't matter what you call it what you want. That's the least interesting thing about it. What name do you use for it? And you can put it within whatever taxonomy you prefer. That's not, and if two scientists want to talk about that thing, even though they call them something different and classify it differently, great, you can do that because it's namespaces and we can coordinate namespaces. Another way that we are evolving very rapidly to deal with difference and to benefit from it is linked data, which I'm not going to explain because I'm at Google, but it is in fact a way of letting people release data very easily without having to worry about getting it classified right in the uniform way. No, you do it in some reasonable way. You point to disambiguating pages, and if somebody does the mapping right, you're pointing to Encyclopedia of Life, I'm pointing to the Tasmanian Field Guide, which I made up. If we want to enable computers to know that we're all talking about the same thing, we can do a mapping and say, that page in Encyclopedia of Life, it's really referring to the same thing as that page in the Tasmanian Field Guide. It's a really good way of getting past differences that don't matter so we can collaborate. So yay for difference. Difference is wonderful, difference is great. It is, but this is what the net sort of looks like a little bit as it is. This is how the net looks like in terms of how we experience it. We do seem to tend to want to hang out with people who are like us. There's reason to think that this is a human thing, maybe even a genetic thing, maybe a brain thing, but we do it. We like to be with people who are like us. And so this is the echo chamber argument that you're all familiar with. So I just want to spend one slide on the echo chamber, because I think it's a real issue. I am not nearly as convinced as many others are that it is the killer issue that some have claimed, but I do think it's a real issue. The problems with understanding it are, so I say one slide, but I got lots of words on the slide, sorry. The problems are difficult and deep, and I think emblematic of a difference about how we think about knowledge and conversation, how knowledge is developed. So first of all, we don't have a lot of data that tells us exactly how much of what the diversity of sources are that we engage with. So that's more data. Harder problem is, well, compared to what? We want to know if the net is making us more open or not, and the echo chamber argument says that, well, we hang out, it's easier to hang out with people that you like, hanging out with, people who are like you, which turns out to be often the same thing. If you hang out with people who are like you in their beliefs, then you end up reconfirming your own beliefs and, in fact, becoming more extreme in your beliefs. If that's the case, the internet is making us less open. But the question is, compared to what? Compared to pre-net, when I grew up, 3 television channels and you had a couple of newspapers, and the newspapers were this big and reported a range of opinion that was actually even smaller than that. Compared to what? We don't have a baseline. And we have a romanticized view of what those days were like. Well, back in the old days, we all read newspapers, and newspapers were full of news. Well, first of all, A, we didn't. B, we were reading tabloids, which are full of crap. And third of all, we don't know what people were actually reading in the newspapers. The New York Times is full of wonderful stories. Most of us read it like this, looking for a headline that catches our eyes. It's not like, 15 years ago, we were all studiously going through every article. So it's really not clear what we're comparing it to. Clay Shirky points out that we may even have the causality wrong. This is the echo chamber theorists, Cass Sunstein in particular, that they may have the causality wrong, that maybe, in fact, we are becoming more polarized because we are in more contact with people with whom we disagree, and that causes us to harden our opinions. There are times in the day when I'm totally an echo chamber guy. If I'm going onto a site of a politician, the candidate who I support, I want an echo chamber. I need an echo chamber because that's how political movements are formed. If I'm going to a sports site, I don't, but I can imagine. If I went to a sports site, I don't particularly maybe want to hear from everybody who hates my team. I'm from Boston, so I'll say the Yankees. I don't necessarily want to go to a site where the Red Sox fans and the Yankees fans are always mixing it up. I want to hang out with Red Sox fans. It's baseball, right? So It's not at all clear how this varies by education level, but if it's there at all, how it varies by education level, by socioeconomic class, by topic, by time of day, and the rest of it. But for me, the two more important, when it comes to knowledge, what's happening in knowledge, the two more important points are the next two. The first is that the echo chamber argument, at least some of its forms, assumes that the only good conversation is one where two people who really disagree can sit down in the Moynihan sense over some coffee and a big bowl of facts, and they each say, you know, I disagree with you, my friend. I'm a Jew, you're a Nazi. I disagree with you, but A, I respect you. I respect your opinions, and I'm open. Maybe you're right. I'm open to being converted. Let's sit down, and maybe I'll become a Nazi, and maybe you'll become a Jew. That's a good conversation. That's a conversation that never happens. Never, ever, never happens. I'm going to tell you, I'm never going to sit down with a Nazi with an open mind and think, yeah, maybe, yeah, that's a good point. You make a good point there, Adolf. It's not going to happen. It's not how conversation works, nor should it be how conversation works, except under very special circumstances. And so to say, well, the web is not full of these Jew meets Nazi conversations, that's a failure of the web. No, it's not. It's a failure of expectation about humans and conversation. And the same thing for, it seems to me that the echo chamber argument, the people who are most worried about it, have a different idea about what conversation is for. How it works. That in order for two people to talk, diversity is wonderful. Keep in mind, the whole point of this little subsection I'm trying to make is that knowledge now can include diversity and difference, disagreement within itself. And this is a big change from knowledge, and it's wonderful. It's really important. At the same time, in order for two people to talk, there has to be so much agreement and so much sameness. Same language, interested in at least one topic that they can talk about, enough common assumptions about how that domain works and what the facts in that domain are, some sense of the norms of conversation, who gets to talk, how much, when do you interrupt, all that sort of very subtle thing. Conversation, to be successful, needs to be 99% sameness. I made the number up, but it's overwhelming sameness and then very small iterations on top of that of difference. That's a requirement for conversation. It's also a requirement for the conversation that you have with the people with whom you're working and you want to move the ball forward. You need an enormous amount of sameness. So the fact that there isn't an enormous amount of difference in these conversations on the web is, again, not a failure of the conversations on the web. It's a failure to recognize how conversation works. Now, having said all that, I don't know how real the echo chamber effect is. I suspect that it is in at least some ways very real. It doesn't actually matter too much whether we have an exact measure of how damaging it is. We, I think, should have some confidence that human beings do prefer to hang out with people whose beliefs are the same as theirs, that there is damage that can be done by doing that, and that there is benefit to opening ourselves up to more and further types of belief. And so no matter how damaging the echo chamber effect is, doesn't matter. We still need to be doing everything we can to counteract it, both personally and institutionally and as a business. And so I will just take the occasion. I'm very happy to be here. Nevertheless, the including of running Google's filters through my social network pretty well ensures I'm going to get more of the same. When in fact, I would rather, speaking as a member of a culture I'm trying to live in, I would rather have you disturb me more. I do appreciate that there's a button that allows you to turn off the personalized so I can see. I would also want you to, this is very similar to the long tail argument, by the way, or you want to pull stuff out of the long tail and you want to disturb people like me so I don't get too comfortable and in my beliefs that need challenging. Okay, so, and clearly this is not simply a Google issue, right? Bing does it and the rest of it. This is an industry issue. So here's Moynihan, here's the promise, the comfort that we will all come together and we will come to agreement and that's what knowledge is for. No, knowledge is better off because now we recognize that we don't agree and because we are linked in those disagreements. Knowledge is not the thing that is settled anymore. It is where this disagreement happens. And I should point out that this quotation is unattributed. We don't know if Moynihan actually said it, who said it, or what the exact quote is. because irony remains the fundamental law of the universe. And the fourth and last point is the web's too, the internet is so scattered and so knowledge is getting too scattered. Well, yeah, no. So books, the opposite of scattered, they're literally bound together in sequence. You cannot get less scattered than a book. This has been the medium of knowledge. And from this has come a way of thinking about how ideas go together, how knowledge, and thus how the world itself, because knowledge is a picture of the world. And knowledge as it comes through books is a picture of the world taken in short steps, each one of which has been tied down with deductive logic or with strong evidence. And if you're writing a book, you're going to start your readers at A, you're going to try to get them to Z by taking these short measured steps. That is the ideal in our culture. That has been the ideal of knowledge. It's the person who's sitting there writing the long-form work that proves her or his point. But there are problems with this that go unnoticed when all we have are books. For example, it means that we write in private, which if you're designing a knowledge ecology, seems entirely backwards. Or you want to be working on this in public. So that when, for example, Darwin, who obviously wrote one of the great long-form works, in The Origin of Species, the first 5 chapters lay out the theory. The next 6 chapters is Darwin sitting alone by himself, thinking about all the awful things that people will say to object to his theory that he's worked on for decades. And some of those objections were real. He was social. He was out among his colleagues in his social network. But some are also him thinking. One might say, one might object. That's what it's totally suboptimal way of doing this, but it's what you had to do. Because you're writing, that's how you wrote in private. Now we don't have to do that so much. Another problem with the long form, book-based long form, is that you're trying to get your readers to Z, you're trying to keep them on the tour bus. Books in some ways are too short. Long form is too short, or it's not wide enough anyway, so you have to try to keep them focused. Keep them focused, even though there's a whole landscape full of interesting ideas and diversions and possibilities. No, stay on the bus. You're on a tour. I'm in charge of the tour. We're going to go like this, and we're going to get here. And then later you can go explore, but it's my damn tour bus. And the third problem, and that's a lost opportunity. That's a paring down of information and of knowledge. And the third is that even though we love and adore long-form works of knowledge, they very rarely work. It's very rare that you'll actually start a day and get all the way to Z. Origin of Species, yeah. I mean, at least for me, I think most people in this room, you get to Z. That's a great work. And it happens occasionally. It doesn't work nearly as often as we think it does, which I think maybe should make us think that this is a poor way of trying to reconstitute the world, that the world maybe doesn't work as short steps that lead in a long chain, that maybe God doesn't think in long-form arguments, because they don't work generally. They often just feel like arbitrary constructions. So I'm certainly not saying that books are going away and going to be replaced by Twitter or whatever. But it seems pretty clear to me that books are losing their pride of place as the epitome of knowledge, the wisest and where knowledge lives. Knowledge lives on networks now. So the opposite of long form is not short form, it's in fact web form. It's the web. And so if Darwin were alive now, one assumes that he would be tweeting from the Beagle as he goes around the Galapagos and writing his blog and posting into archive.org and getting things wrong and right. And there would be a web of people, some of whom he knew, most of whom he doesn't, who are correcting him, arguing with him, bringing in their own evidence to support or to deny, to explain his works to people who otherwise wouldn't understand them, to make money off of them as travel agents on tours of the Galapagos. See the finches yourself. Go on a wild finch hunt. A web would grow up. Darwin would publish perhaps his work, his long-form work, but it would have more value embedded in the web than alone on a bookcase. That knowledge actually now lives in this network. It's at the level of the network of people corresponding, disagreeing, agreeing, enhancing, differing in every possible way. That's where knowledge is. You can see this in action, and this is an example I'm borrowing from Michael Nielsen, who's Reinventing Discovery. It came out about a month ago, really good book about network knowledge in science. He, in conversation, points to the faster-than-light neutrinos, about which I know nothing. But the original article was posted at archive.org, prepress, no peer review, no guarantee. They've just been, it's just put it up there as is. Within a couple months, there had been 80 other articles posted there, plus countless other ways that people weighed in all across the web. Expanding, expounding, proposing ideas, explaining to people like me who couldn't otherwise understand it. This web is where the knowledge was. It did not go through peer review. If it went through peer review, it would be 2 years before it got published, maybe a year and a half. They hurried, and then somebody would write a letter, and 3 months later, the letter would be published. It's too slow. You can't scale science this way. We already know this, for example, from genetics. It's a very similar sort of thing. Open access could not be more important. The knowledge lives in the web. One of the reasons this is really important is that previous media were other people deciding what's interesting to us. And they'd be right or wrong. And frequently they'd be right. But frequently they would be wrong. The web consists, it's not that it's a crowd that's deciding what's interesting to us. It's that the web is a direct reflection of what's interesting to us. Every link is an expression of human interest. A direct expression of human interest. The web overall is an expression of what we as a species care about, at least people on the web. It can be very distressing because apparently about 50% of what we care about is porn. Nevertheless, that's what it is. And so each of these links is something human and live. It is a direct expression of what matters to us. And this is transformative of knowledge. So why did knowledge turn out to be so fragile? To go back to that original question, and I promise you I can't answer it. I want to point to two points. The first is that if you go through the traditional list of characteristics of knowledge, there's only one knowledge, so it's singular, it's settled, it's unchanging, it's sort of neat and organized, it's relatively scarce, it's impersonal in that whatever is true for everybody. And you look at the characteristics of network knowledge. These characteristics are characteristics, I believe, of not only of knowledge, but also of the internet, because that's my hypothesis. The new medium is giving the knowledge its new properties. These are also characteristics of the world that we live in, what it means to live in a world as a human being. It's overwhelming, it's unsettled, it's unresolved, it's messy, it's deeply, endlessly connected, but sometimes loosely connected, and it's held together by the fact that the world matters to us, that it's interesting to us, that we care about it. So the first conclusion, I maybe put conclusion in air quotes, but the first conclusion is that network knowledge may or may not be better knowledge, truer knowledge. I think that in general, this is the greatest time in human history to be somebody who cares about knowledge. So I would say, yeah, no, generally it is truer, but leave that aside. Let's not have that argument. Nevertheless, network knowledge, the knowledge that we see emerging on the web, is truer to the nature of knowledge. That is, to knowledge as part of the human condition, as truer to the world in which we live. As opposed to the old that said, no, we can settle things with certainty by passing them through expert filters. No, we couldn't do that. And the second conclusion, and the last thing I want to say, is that despite Moynihan and the Enlightenment, what we have in common is not knowledge. That's not what's going to enable us to live together peacefully in the world. We're not going to agree about things. So what we have in common is not knowledge about which we agree. What we have in common is a shared world about which we disagree. And what makes me hopeful is that on the web, and with knowledge in particular on the web, I do see us getting far better, more sophisticated, in some ways more tolerant of disagreement, and in fact enabling difference, using difference to advance us. So if there's going to be peace through knowledge, it's going to be a very, very noisy peace. Thank you.
So questions over at the mic?
Questions at the mic. I'm sorry to have gone so long.
So thanks for the presentation, but made me curious. Why then you decided to write a book to express all of that?
Why did I write a book? A couple of reasons. I'm old-fashioned. My parents would be proud if they were here. And the web doesn't yet pay advances. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, those are honest answers. They're not very good answers, which is why it's unfortunate. I maybe saying in my defense, I do a lot on the web too, but
Just even if the well, taking a lot of what you're saying is right, that the knowledge is across the web in the network. How do you think about there's still presumably, even if people have different opinions, relatively more valuable information knowledge there and a lot of crap, for lack of a better word. Do you form any form of judgment about differentiating stuff that may be valuable to different people versus what's less valuable to everybody?
yes, I mean, we have to, right? Because we have to, otherwise we will die and will kill others inadvertently. So yeah, we have to do this. It seems to me the only process is basically a political one. And I don't mean through elected officials, so that plays a part, but rather it's what it has in fact always been, as the postmodernists, and all of this, by the way, postmodernists say everything I just said, except that now it's actually real on the web. They've said that too, by the way. So as they have long said and recognized, knowledge has been imbued with struggles for power. That was hidden to us to some extent because the victors were so absolute in their victory. You couldn't hear all the disagreement. All you could hear was what was coming through the broadcast towers, and they were they're pretty much in agreement. So it was hidden from us, but it was there because it was a solid victory for those who gained control of the means of knowledge. We are, I think, destined forever to be in a continuous negotiation and political struggle to try to get what we believe with good cause is the truth to carry policy and to inform people's minds. There's the old technique of establishing a canon and basically removing access to everything outside of that canon simply won't work anymore. And there was an enormous price to that old technique as well. So I don't think this is all bad. This, to me, is a more realistic, we now have a more realistic assessment of how knowledge works. To put this more positively, I think this is very close to how scientists actually think and work. They come to important conclusions, they base important decisions on those conclusions, but they always talk about hypotheses and evidence and are aware that, well, it could be wrong. That's a more adult view of knowledge than the, says it in the encyclopedia on the page, and so it's got to be right view, which is only a bit of a caricature of our previous paper-based approach.
I'm in another life, I'm a math and science teacher.
Uh-oh.
And much of our time is spent disseminating, and the debate is around what should we teach as opposed to, why or how. Even when we use social media and web, it's to disseminate or to help students to find information. Based on your research, what do you see as helpful going forward for using the web, that knowledge base?
So I would always defer to a teacher who is actually teaching. And having said that, I'm about to, say things that will be foolish at best. So I have nothing interesting to say. There are obviously levels of things that we want taken as fact and are fact. No reason to dispute them, and we want our students to know those and not to have serious doubts about them, always to be slightly skeptical. That's what we've always done as part of the educational system, and we clearly need to continue doing that. It's not, well, just go out, build a wiki, and whatever you believe is true, because it's not true that whatever you believe is true. The phrase, well, that's true for you, actually drives me insane, because in that case, we're not talking about truth, and we do need to be talking about truth in the educational system. There are a couple of things I think may be happening, and I think they're all obvious. One is I think we are beginning to understand through the web and somewhat through our children that learning is not simply about enriching the individual. That's nice, that's important, but that's sort of a selfish act, where you get educated and you become a better person, and that's grand, and maybe you become a better citizen and you help others. But so you look at the software development community, at the environment that they, or perhaps I should say you, have built for themselves, and it is so generous and so amazingly productive. I think it's reasonable to argue that the software developers have built the best environment for rapid learning we've ever had in our history. You have a question, you'll get it answered. You need a code fragment, it's there. It's there for free. When you do your own, you improve that one or do another, you'll make it free. This culture of learning in public as an act that is not only bettering you, but is bettering the public, that is an amazing thing within the software world, and I hope that it will become an amazing thing within the educational system overall. It's not simply about me making you smarter, my student. It's about us learning together, A, of course, and B, doing this in public as a way of improving the world in which we all live. Helping students to be literate about the web, that would also be really, really helpful as well. And that's beginning to happen, but it seems a little slower than I would have expected. I so told you I had nothing. You know.
Part of the value of pursuing a one definitive truth is that, at least in theory, it should have a correspondence with an objective reality. So if you understand the gravity, you understand the motions of the planets. If we lessen our focus on the one truth, does it lessen our ability to be able to optimize our reality? For example, coming up with economic policies that actually grow economies, or safety policies that keep us safe.
So first of all, we absolutely should be trying to head towards the one truth. We just call it the truth. Right? The world is one way and it is not another. Right? That, I firmly believe that, and we should be, of course, heading as far as, doing our best with that. I'm going to reject your metaphysics, but accept your conclusion. So maybe the shorthand for this is that I'm basically a Heideggerian and take a more phenomenological approach. So I don't, the correspondence idea of truth, that it's a set of statements that correspond to how the real world is, leaves out the way in which truth is an aspect of how we engage with the world, not an independent picture of it. So we can leave that argument aside. I'm not sure that it actually makes a difference, and still think that, yes, we absolutely have to be trying to figure out what's true about the world so that we can make good policies that will then affect the world. That's crucial. I want to be clear about what I was saying before, because we need scientists, we need mathematicians, we need we need everybody to be working on this. What I was saying before is we should give up on the hope that we're all going to agree about the facts. But there are still facts, and we still need to be pursuing them for precisely the reason you say, because the real world, reality, our fates depend upon it. So I've sort of compressed the metaphysics and accept the beginning and the end of your statement.
I want to thank you for coming to Google today.
Well, thank you for having me. Oh, and
that's it.
thank you very much.